After Margot died, the world shifted on its axis. It's not something you think about, how quiet a house can be until the person who filled it is gone. The first morning I woke up alone, I turned to her side of the bed without thinking, half expecting to see her tousled hair, her hand reaching for the alarm clock. But there was nothing but a faint indentation on the pillow, a scent of lavender that nearly undid me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the slippers by her nightstand. Pink, with a small tear at the seam from where she'd stubbed her toe that one time getting up to check on the weather. She'd joked about sewing it back together, but never did. I'd offered, but she waved me off with that laugh that still echoes in my ears. God, how I'd give anything to hear that laugh now. The house itself felt wrong, like it had expanded overnight, every shadow longer, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a reprimand. I'd wander into the kitchen, open the cabinet, and reach for the mug she always used, blue with a chipped rim, only to realize I'd placed it there, untouched, months ago. I kept setting the table for two. Stupid. Claire, my daughter, started calling me more often after the funeral. Her voice was too bright, too forced, like she was trying to convince both of us she was holding it together. Dad, she'd say, you shouldn't be alone in that big old house. It's too much. I'd hear Travis in the background, his voice a low murmur. I never liked the way he talked, like everything he said was the final word on any subject. One day, Claire suggested I come to Louisville. Be near the grandkids, she said. It'll be good for you, Dad. I could hear the strain in her voice, like she was tired of worrying about me from afar. I didn't want to be a burden, so I told her I'd think about it. I spent the rest of that day walking from room to room, staring at the life Margot and I had built. The pictures on the mantle, our wedding, Claire's high school graduation, that blurry snapshot from our anniversary cruise. Each one felt like a shard of glass, sharp and unyielding. I ran my fingers over the frames, tracing the outlines of smiles and laughter that felt like they belonged to someone else. Margot's closet still smelled like her. I'd opened it once, just to bury my face in her clothes, desperate for a whiff of her perfume. Vanilla lace, she'd called it, though it always reminded me of Saturday mornings and cinnamon rolls. I couldn't bring myself to pack it up. Every time I tried, my hands would tremble, and I'd have to sit down. In the end, it was the slippers that did it. I found them one morning, turned slightly toward the bed as if waiting for her feet to slide in. Something inside me cracked, and I realized I couldn't keep living in a museum to a life that was over. Claire was right. Maybe being near the grandkids would ease the ache. Maybe the sound of their laughter would drown out the silence. So I packed. Not everything, just a few boxes, labeled in my shaky handwriting. I didn't take the blue mug. I left the slippers where they were, like a quiet memorial to the woman who taught me how to dance in the kitchen and how to love without conditions. Loading the boxes into the car felt like an act of betrayal, like I was leaving Margot behind. I sat in the driver's seat with the keys in my hand, staring at the house that had been my home for 40 years. The place where I'd taught Claire to ride a bike, where Margot and I had hosted 4th of July barbecues, where we'd whispered secrets under the covers. I don't know how long I sat there, the engine off, my hand resting on the steering wheel. A bird sang from a tree branch overhead, bright and defiant against the heavy gray sky. I almost turned back, but then I saw Margot's reflection in the rearview mirror. Not really her, just the ghost of her smile in my memory, and I knew she'd want me to keep living, not just existing. So I turned the key. The engine coughed to life, rattling like it always did when the temperature dipped. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. Not once. If I had, I think I might have put the car in park and gone back inside, shut the door, and pretended the rest of the world didn't exist. But I didn't. The drive to Louisville felt longer than it should have. Every mile felt like I was being stretched thin, pulled between the man I'd been and the man I was becoming. I kept thinking of Margot's slippers by the bed, how they'd never be filled again, how the space beside me on the couch would always be empty. When I reached Claire's house, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and blue, with a slash of orange near the horizon. I sat in the driveway for a moment, staring at the neatly trimmed hedges and the porch swing that creaked in the wind. Claire came out to greet me, her smile too tight, her arms too thin. She looked tired. Maybe we both did. Hey, Dad, she said, her voice hesitant. Come on in. I stepped out of the car, my knees creaking like the old porch swing. Travis was nowhere to be seen. I tried not to read too much into that. Claire wrapped her arms around me in a hug that barely lasted 2 seconds. I wanted to hold on longer, but she pulled away too quickly, as if she had 100 other things to do. "Let's get you settled," she said, her tone brisk. I followed her inside, the smell of fresh paint and lemon cleaner assaulting my senses. It wasn't home, but maybe it would be. Maybe it could be. I let her lead me down the hallway, my steps slow, my heart even slower. I didn't know what waited for me beyond that door, but I told myself I could handle it. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the slippers were still by the bed, waiting for feet that would never return, and I was a man on the edge of a life I hadn't chosen. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to step into it anyway. I had thought that moving in with Claire and Travis would feel like a homecoming of sorts, a chance to fill the echoing silence Margot left behind with the sounds of family. I'd pictured warm meals, laughter at the dinner table, maybe even a little chaos from the grandkids that might distract me from the grief that wrapped around my ribs like barbed wire. But the moment I walked through the door, I felt the cold front that had always lingered in Travis's presence. Claire smiled too brightly when she saw me, her eyes darting over my shoulder as if expecting someone more interesting to arrive. She took the lightest box from my arms and said, "Let's get you settled in, Dad." Travis didn't even look at me. He carried on with his phone call in the living room, nodding his head and muttering about projections and the quarterly report. Claire led me downstairs, her voice clipped and efficient. "We thought the basement would give you some privacy," she said, as though she was granting me a kindness. "And the kids can still play upstairs without worrying about being too loud." The basement was clean, I'll give them that. Freshly painted walls, no visible cobwebs. But it was a far cry from the warm home I'd left behind. The floor was concrete, covered by a thin rug that felt like sandpaper under my feet. A single bed with a stiff mattress sat in the corner, an old wooden dresser beside it. A lamp without a shade cast a harsh glow that made the space feel like an interrogation cell. Claire stood with her arms folded, as if bracing herself for my reaction. "We just want to stay organized," she said, glancing back toward the stairs where Travis had reappeared, his eyes cool and assessing. "Boundaries," Travis chimed in. "Everyone's happier when there are clear boundaries." I opened my mouth, but the words caught somewhere in my throat. Margot had always been the one to bridge the gaps between me and others, to smooth the sharp edges. Now I was left to stumble over them on my own. Claire gestured to the small bathroom off to the side, the door sporting a deadbolt that glinted under the harsh lamplight. "You'll have your own bathroom," she said, too cheerfully. "Just keep it locked, okay? The kids' safety, you know." "Sure," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again. Of course. The suitcase I'd brought felt suddenly too large in my hands, like a burden I couldn't carry anymore. I set it on the bed and tried to smile. "Thanks for setting this up." Claire's smile was brittle, like glass ready to shatter. "We're just trying to make it work, Dad. You know things have been tight since the layoffs. We need everyone to do their part." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what my part meant anymore. I'd spent 40 years working double shifts, taking overtime, saving every penny so Claire could go to college, so she'd have a shot at a life better than the one Margot and I had scratched out for ourselves. And now here I was, standing on a cold floor in a basement that smelled faintly of damp cardboard and unspoken resentment. Travis stepped forward, his hands shoved into his pockets. "You're not a guest here," he said, his tone flat, rehearsed. Well, we're all in this together, but let's be honest, you're a burden." That word, it hit like a brick to the chest. A burden. The word echoed off the concrete walls, bounced around until it found a place deep inside me. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my face from crumpling. I'd always prided myself on being steady, on being the one people leaned on. Now I was the one being leaned away from. Claire put a hand on my shoulder, too light to be comforting. "We just need to be realistic, Dad," she said. "You're not as young as you used to be. We can't take care of everything for you." I almost laughed at that, but it stuck in my throat. I'd spent my life taking care of everyone else. Margot, Claire, even Travis when he needed a reference for his first job. Now, it seemed, my usefulness had expired. I turned away from them, staring at the boxes stacked neatly along the wall. My life, reduced to cardboard and packing tape. I thought about Margot's slippers by the bed, how even in death she'd left space for me to grieve, to find my way through the darkness. Here, it felt like there was no space for anything but silence. Travis cleared his throat. "Dinner's at 6, he said. "We eat as a family upstairs, but maybe you'd be more comfortable eating here sometimes. So you don't feel overwhelmed." "Of course," I said, my voice scraping against my dry throat. "That makes sense." Claire gave me another 2-second hug, more of a pat on the back than anything else. "We're glad you're here, Dad," she said, though her eyes didn't match her words. I watched them climb the stairs, their voices blending together in a low hum. When the door closed, it felt like a lid had been snapped shut on a coffin. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the deadbolt on the bathroom door. Locked, organized, a burden. I whispered it to the empty room, testing it on my tongue. It tasted like metal, like betrayal, like the final confirmation that I'd overstayed my welcome in my own life. I looked at the suitcase by the bed, the one I'd packed with trembling hands back in the home that used to hold laughter and sunlight and the smell of Margot's cinnamon rolls. I thought about unpacking, but what was the point? Every item felt like an anchor now, a reminder that I didn't belong here. I lay back on the bed, the mattress stiff and unyielding beneath me, and stared at the low ceiling. I wondered if this was what dying felt like, a slow, quiet erasure, the world going on without you while you tried to remember who you used to be. But even then, in that cold basement, I promised myself I wouldn't let them take that from me. I might be a guest here, an intruder in their carefully organized lives, but I was still me, and I still had a story to finish. So I closed my eyes and held tight to the memory of Margot's laugh, the warmth of her slippers by the bed. I wasn't ready to let go of that. Not yet. Not ever. The day Claire and Travis left for Myrtle Beach felt like the start of a bad joke, except I wasn't laughing. Travis had made a big show of pulling the car out of the driveway, all smiles and stiff handshakes. "Safety reasons," he said, dangling the keys like a prize. "Don't want you wandering off." He'd given me that half-smirk he'd perfected over the years, the one that made me feel like an old dog too slow to learn a new trick. "Have a good trip," I managed, though my voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. Claire hugged me 2 seconds, light as always, and said, "Call if you need anything." But she didn't leave a number. She didn't even leave a spare key to the house. Just a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The garage door rattled shut behind them, leaving me standing there in the echo of their absence. I watched their SUV pull away, the sun glinting off the windows like a shield I couldn't penetrate. I told myself I should be grateful they'd invited me to live here at all, but the word burden still clung to my ribs like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I went inside, and the house felt twice as empty as before. Upstairs was locked. Travis always locked the upstairs when they were gone. "Boundaries," he'd said. "It's important to keep everything organized." Like I was a file they could misplace. Like I might wander upstairs and mess with their carefully curated life. I went to the fridge, hoping for something to distract me, even if it was just a can of soda. When I opened the door, the cold air hit me like a slap. On the middle shelf, a single bottle of mustard and a half-empty water bottle. That was it. Not a scrap of bread, not a slice of meat, not even a leftover cookie from the kids. I stared at the mustard like it might sprout wings and fly me out of there. The pantry? Padlocked. A literal lock, shiny brass and brand new. The sight of it made something in me crack. I reached for the knob, rattled it, half hoping it would magically swing open. It didn't. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood and let the wave of shame wash over me. I thought about the rotisserie chicken I'd seen Travis carrying in last night. I'd smelled it, too. Rosemary and garlic. So vivid it made my stomach clench. I'd gone to bed early, telling myself I wasn't hungry, but the truth was, I wasn't invited to dinner. The smell had taunted me from the top of the stairs. That smell clung to me now, like a taunt. I turned to the trash can, my gut twisting. Lifting the lid felt like an admission of defeat. Inside, I found it. A full rotisserie chicken, untouched. 2 loaves of bread, still sealed. A few apples, bruised but edible. They'd rather throw it away than let me eat it. That was their message, spelled out in the language of waste. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Just hollow. Like someone had scooped out the parts of me that used to care. I closed the trash can, the lid thudding shut like the final word in a conversation I wasn't invited to join. I stood in the middle of that kitchen, the clock on the microwave blinking at me like an accusation. 11:07 a.m. The time didn't matter. Nothing did. I thought of Margot, how she used to say, "You always find a way." Her voice was like a thread pulling me back from the edge. So I found a way. I'd seen Travis's office the day we moved in. He'd left the door cracked, and curiosity got the best of me. Inside, he kept a small safe tucked beneath his desk, the combination scribbled on a sticky note stuck to the side of his monitor. Safety deposit, he'd muttered when he caught me glancing at it, his voice sharp. Private. I pretended not to notice. Now I noticed. I climbed the stairs, my knees stiff with every step, the air up here thick with the smell of lemon cleaner and something colder, resentment. The office door was closed, but not locked. I stepped inside, the carpet muffling my footsteps. The safe sat beneath the desk like a promise. I knelt, my hands shaking a little, but I remembered the sticky note. 5-3-1-7. I dialed it in, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a small stack of bills, neatly arranged. I counted quickly, my breath catching. $300, 300 pieces of permission to leave. I took it. No guilt. No second thoughts. They'd made it clear I was an afterthought here. A burden. I was simply taking back a little dignity. On Travis's desk, I found a pad of yellow legal paper. I scribbled a note. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. That was all. I didn't owe them any more explanations. I packed what little I'd brought, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, the photo of Margot in her garden, smiling beneath her wide-brimmed hat. I left the rest. Let them keep it. Let them organize it. I paused in the doorway, looking back one last time at the place that never felt like mine. The shadows in the corners seemed to lean in, whispering, burden. I shut the door on that word. Outside, the sun felt too bright, too hopeful for a man like me. But I stepped into it anyway, the bills in my pocket, the taste of mustard still in my throat. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being hungry for more than just food. I was done being a burden. I was done. I didn't have much of a plan after I left Claire's house. Just a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the cash I'd taken from Travis's safe burning a quiet hole in my pocket, and the photo of Margot tucked safely between a clean shirt and my worn-out sweater. I drifted through town like a man with no map, stopping at diners for coffee I didn't really want, watching other people's lives flicker past me like a movie I'd never been cast in. It was late afternoon when I found the listing. A small duplex on the edge of town, cheap enough that it felt like a mercy. The real estate agent looked surprised to see me, a gray-haired man with nothing but a duffel, and even more surprised when I handed her the entire deposit in cash. Just sign here, she'd said, her eyes darting between me and the stack of bills like she thought she was part of a sting operation. The place itself was nothing special. 2 narrow units divided by a thin wall, a postage stamp yard out front that looked like it had given up trying to grow anything. But it was mine. The key turned in the lock, and that meant something. The first night there, I lay awake on the squeaky twin mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I thought about Margot's laugh, the way she'd called me stubborn when I refused to throw away her slippers, even when they'd worn down to the soles. I wondered what she'd say if she saw me now, alone in a place that smelled faintly of mildew and old pizza boxes, trying to piece together a life from scraps. It was on the second night that I heard them, 2 kids, voices soft and urgent through the paper-thin wall. A boy, older maybe, was telling the younger one to hush, that Mom would hear. I listened, uninvited, as the younger voice sniffled and said he was scared. It's okay, the older one said. I'll tell Mom. That word, Mom, hit me harder than I expected. I thought of Claire, how she'd called me Dad, with that bright smile that felt like it belonged to a stranger. The next morning, I stood in the narrow hallway between our doors, listening to the sounds of their morning. The microwave dinging, a mother's voice muttering about toast and school buses, the scuffle of small shoes on the linoleum. I hadn't heard a sound like that in years, at least, not in a way that felt like home. That afternoon, I was carrying a box of dishes up the steps when the door across the hall swung open. She stood there, a woman. In her 30s, dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but alive in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She wore a faded sweatshirt that had seen better days and carried a mug that said #OneMom in chipped blue letters. Hi, she said, her voice guarded but polite. You must be the new neighbor. I nodded, shifting the box to my other hip. Yeah, just moved in yesterday. I almost said Dad, out of habit, but the word felt too raw, too heavy. I'm Tom, I finished. She gave a tired smile. I'm Janelle. She hesitated, glancing back into her apartment where I could see 2 boys wrestling over a cereal box. Those are my sons, Silas and Micah. Nice to meet you all, I said. She looked at me for a long second, like she was deciding whether I was safe. Then she said, if you ever need anything, just knock. It's nice to have a neighbor again. Same to you, I said. The words felt like a bridge stretching across a chasm I hadn't realized was there. Days passed. I'd see Silas and Micah on the steps, backpacks too big for their small shoulders, arguing about who got to press the elevator button. Janelle always followed a few steps behind, her face lined with exhaustion, but lit with a love that reminded me of Margot. One evening, I found her sitting on the stoop, head in her hands. Her eyes were red, and the boys were inside, their laughter muffled behind the door. I didn't mean to intrude, but my steps were slow and deliberate, my heart a quiet ache in my chest. Everything okay? I asked. She looked up, startled, but then her face softened. Just life, she said. Their dad. It's complicated. Her voice trailed off, and I saw the bruises fading, but they're all the same on her wrist. I nodded, feeling something solid settle in my chest. I'd seen too many good people worn down by the wrong kind of love. Margot used to say, sometimes people need a safe place more than they need advice. Listen, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've got some money from my wife's life insurance. I've been saving it for me, I guess. But the other half of this duplex is empty. Her eyes widened, suspicious. You're not. I raised a hand. No strings. You can pay me $1 a month if it makes you feel better. Just let the boys have a place where they can feel safe. She stared at me, her lips trembling like she wanted to refuse but couldn't. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. That night, I found an old set of bunk beds on Facebook Marketplace and spent the evening assembling them in the other apartment. Silas and Micah hovered at the door, eyes bright with wonder. We've never had bunk beds before. Micah squealed. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in too long. Well, now you do. Janelle stood beside me, her hands folded over her heart. You didn't have to, I know, I said. But sometimes you just do. I watched her blink back tears. I remembered Margot's words, quiet joy. This, I realized, was what she'd meant. Not the big gestures, but the small ones that made the world a little less sharp. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment, the sound of the boys giggling across the hall filtered through the wall. I leaned back in my chair, letting the laughter wrap around me like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own life. I felt needed, and that was enough. It started with the mailbox. I'd gone out that morning, a mug of coffee in one hand, the other hand gripping the railing like a lifeline against the ache in my hip. The sun was bright, too bright, and the air smelled like cut grass and diesel, the way it always did on trash pickup day. I opened the mailbox and reached inside, expecting nothing but a couple of flyers and maybe a water bill. Instead, I found a single envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name scrawled in thick black Sharpie. My stomach dropped. I'd never liked surprises, not even when Margot was alive, and the surprises came wrapped in bows. But this was no gift. I carried the envelope inside, set my coffee down, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph, glossy and sharp-edged. It showed me and Janelle's boys, Silas and Micah, crouched in the yard with a half-finished birdhouse between us, our hands stained with wood glue and paint. I remembered that afternoon perfectly. The boys had argued over the color. Micah wanted it blue, Silas wanted red, so we'd compromised with a stripe of each. I'd thought it was a small thing, a quiet, good moment in a life that had felt too empty for too long. But across the photo, in thick black marker, someone had written, "You replaced your grandkids with trash." The word trash hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I dropped the photo on the table, my hands trembling. I'd always thought I was a good man, a good father, a good grandfather. But that one word made me doubt everything. I sat there, staring at it. The letters bled together like they'd been drawn by someone with a shaky hand, or maybe someone who'd wanted to hide just enough. I didn't need a signature. I could feel Travis's voice in that marker, the same way I'd heard it every time he'd said, boundaries. The same way he'd called me a burden. I spent the rest of that day listening for every creak in the floorboards, every rattle of the doorknob. I didn't tell Janelle. She had enough on her plate. And what could I have said? Hey, the man who married my daughter hates me enough to stalk me. It felt too raw, too humiliating. 2 nights later, it got worse. I'd fallen asleep in the recliner with the TV on low, some cooking show with people laughing and stirring sauce that smelled better than anything I'd tasted in months. The sound of metal scraping against pavement woke me. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe some drunk stumbling down the sidewalk. But then I heard it again, metal, deliberate, angry. I stood, the floor cold beneath my feet, and pulled back the curtain. There in the dim glow of the street lamp, I saw him. A man in a hoodie, head down, moving like he was trying to outrun his own guilt. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the limp. The careful way he shifted his weight to his left leg. Travis had knee surgery last year. My breath caught. I watched him for a moment, my heart thudding like it wanted to leap out of my chest. He slashed the last tire on my car and then stumbled away, disappearing into the shadows like a coward. I should have called the police right then, but the shame of it all glued me to the spot. Shame that I'd let myself become a target, that I'd moved here thinking I could outrun the disappointment in my daughter's eyes. The next morning, I stared at the flat tires, the rubber flayed open like a wound. Janelle came out with her boys, her face pale. "Tom, what happened?" I shook my head, tried to smile. "Must have been kids," I lied. "Nothing to worry about." But she didn't buy it. Her eyes were sharp, knowing. She touched my arm gently, like Margot used to. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone," she said. I wanted to tell her the whole truth, that my own family had turned on me, that I felt like the walls were closing in, that every night I half expected Travis to show up with a crowbar and a smirk. But I couldn't. I didn't want her to feel unsafe. Instead, I told her, "Don't worry. I'll handle it." That night, I sat in my recliner, the house dark except for the lamp beside me. I stared at the sharpest scrawled photograph, at the tires on my car that would need replacing, at the wall that separated my life from Janelle's. I thought about Margot, how she'd always told me to stand up for myself, even when it hurt. I reached for the phone and called Elijah Crane, the lawyer who'd helped me navigate Margot's will. He'd been a friend once, years back. A steady hand when the world felt like it was tilting. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and calm. "Tom," he said, "I haven't heard from you in a while." I told him everything. About the photo, the message, the tires, the man in the hoodie with the limp. I heard him scribbling notes, the scratch of his pen a small comfort. "Tom," he said, his voice careful, "this is harassment, possibly even elder abuse. We need to get ahead of this. Do what you need to," I said. "Just make sure they don't touch Janelle or the boys." He promised he would, and I believed him. After I hung up, I stood at the window, watching the shadows pool and fade under the streetlights. I thought about Travis's face, the way he'd looked at me that day I moved into Claire's basement, like I was an inconvenience he couldn't wait to unload. I thought about how a man can be both family and enemy, both blood and betrayal. That night, I slept with one eye open, listening for the sound of footsteps that might mean the past had come to claim me. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I wasn't the same man who'd let people lock away his food and call him a burden. I was a man who still had fight left in him, and I was done letting anyone, especially Travis, erase that. I never thought I'd see the day my own daughter would show up on my porch looking like she'd just come from a battlefield. Claire had always been composed, the kind of woman who ironed her shirts twice and color-coded her grocery lists. But the woman standing on my porch that morning, hair disheveled, eyes wild, papers clutched in her trembling hands, was a stranger. I'd just come back from walking down the block to stretch my legs. My knees had been acting up, and the doctor said a little movement would do me good. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the sky a washed-out orange, when I saw her car parked at the curb, idling like she couldn't bring herself to turn off the engine. She'd never visited this early before. Usually, she called first, polite but distant. She slammed the door with more force than I'd ever seen from her. The sound made me jump. She marched up the walkway, her shoes clacking like the sound of a gavel. I tried to smile, to pretend we could still talk like father and daughter, but the papers in her hands looked like an accusation before she even spoke a word. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp and unfamiliar. "We need to talk." She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the living room, her perfume, a new one, too strong, filling the small space like an unwelcome guest. I followed her, feeling every one of my 68 years. "Claire, what's going on?" I asked, my voice rough. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of the room, her back straight, her jaw tight, and brandished the papers like a sword. "This is a petition for guardianship," she said, the words rehearsed. "I'm filing it today." The words didn't land at first. They floated in the air, unreal. Guardianship? For me? I blinked at her, the room tilting around me. "What are you talking about, Claire?" My voice cracked. She crossed her arms, her chin lifted like a prosecutor. "You're not thinking clearly, Dad. You're letting her," she spat the word like it was poison, "take advantage of you. She's using you, manipulating you." Her eyes darted toward the door that led to Janelle's side of the duplex. The accusation hit me like a slap. Janelle? She's done nothing but be kind. She's a neighbor, a friend. That's all. Claire's face contorted. "Dad, you bought bunk beds for her kids. You gave her a place to live practically rent-free. You're giving away money that's supposed to be mine. You're not acting like yourself." Her voice trembled at the end, a flash of something like fear. Or maybe it was greed. I couldn't tell anymore. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Is that what this is about? Money?" I asked quietly. She flinched, just for a moment. "It's about your mental health," she said, but her eyes flickered, betraying her. "It's about making sure you're safe from people who might take advantage of you." I stared at her, searching for the daughter I used to know, the little girl who'd drawn me crayon pictures of birds in the sky, who'd clung to my leg when she was scared of thunderstorms. But all I saw was a woman who'd let Travis's poison seep into her bones. "Do you really believe I've lost my mind, Claire? Or are you just scared the money won't be yours?" Her lips pressed together, thin and white. She didn't answer. Just stood there, staring at the floor, as if she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. I wanted to shout, to tell her how much it hurt to see her standing there with papers that said I wasn't fit to make my own decisions. But my voice was gone, replaced by a deep ache that started in my chest and spread to my bones. "Margot would have been ashamed," I whispered, not even sure she heard me. Claire's head snapped up. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare bring Mom into this. She's not here." I felt the floor sway beneath me. "No, she's not," I said. "But she taught me one thing. Family doesn't cage each other like this." I lifted a trembling hand toward the papers. "That's what this is, a cage. You want to lock me up because I'm not the man you want me to be anymore." Her face crumpled, but only for a moment before the hard mask slid back into place. "I'm doing this because I love you," she said, but the words were brittle and cold. I turned away, staring out the window at the small yard, where the grass was finally starting to grow. Janelle's boys had left a soccer ball on the edge of my lawn, and the sight of it, bright red and scuffed, made me ache for a world where kindness wasn't a currency that got traded for control. "You can file whatever you want," I said, my voice low. "But you've lost me, Claire. The woman who stood by me, who called me Dad like it meant something, that's not who you are anymore." Her breath hitched. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned on her heel and left, the papers still clutched in her hand. I stood there, listening to the sound of the door slamming shut like the end of a chapter one hadn't realized was over. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought about all the years I'd given her. Late nights fixing the old car so she could get to school, early mornings making her breakfast before work, every single sacrifice I'd made to make sure she never had to feel the hunger or fear that had shaped me. And now, here she was, trying to put me in a cage built from signatures and stamps. Janelle knocked gently on the door. I turned, and she was there, her face full of worry. "I heard her shouting," she said, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" I tried to smile. "I will be," I said. "But I think I've finally realized that sometimes the people you think you know best can turn out to be strangers." She stepped closer, her hand resting on my arm. "You're not alone," she whispered. "You've got people here who care about you." I looked into her eyes and felt something uncoil inside me, something that had been wound too tight for too long. "Thanks," I said, my voice rough. "That means more than you know." As she left, I picked up the photo of Margot on the table, the one with her sun hat and that bright smile that never failed to make me feel like I could do anything. "Well, Margot," I said to the empty room, "it looks like our daughter's grown into someone we don't recognize." I swallowed the grief that rose like bile. But I'm still me, and I won't let them take that from me. I stood a little straighter then, the morning light catching the edges of the papers she'd left behind. I'd face whatever came next, petition, court, betrayal, like the man I'd always been, stubborn, determined, and free. No signature was going to take that away from me. It was barely dawn when I found the bird on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was a bundle of old leaves or maybe some trash that had blown in during the night. But when I bent down, the truth of it hit me like a gut punch. A small brown bird, sparrow, maybe, lay sprawled on the welcome mat, its neck twisted at an angle no living thing could endure. Blood pooled under its head, soaking into the fibers like an accusation. I stood there, coffee cup trembling in my hand, staring at the fragile bones, the feathers ruffled and broken. I thought of the photos on my wall, Margot's garden, her hands cradling birds she'd rescued after storms. She'd always loved them, said they were a sign of hope. But this wasn't hope. This was a message. Travis. It had to be. I remembered the limp in the footage, the same one that slashed my tires. A dead bird felt like the next step, a quiet escalation in a war I hadn't wanted to fight. I picked it up carefully, my hands trembling. Even lifeless, it felt warm, like it had only just died. I whispered an apology to it, ridiculous maybe, but it felt like the right thing to do. I carried it to the small patch of dirt by the walkway and dug a shallow grave with the edge of my shoe. Margot would have wanted me to bury it. She always said the dead deserved respect, no matter how small. Afterward, I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, and looked around. The street was empty, the morning too still. I couldn't see Travis, but I felt him, his presence in the shadows, the way a cold wind lets you know a storm is coming. Inside, I locked the door and went to the living room, my hands still shaking. I called Elijah. "They're getting bolder," I said. My voice sounded thin and old in my ears, but Elijah didn't flinch. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice a lifeline. I told him about the bird, about the way it felt like a warning, about the guardianship papers, the dead tires, the picture defaced with Sharpie, every little cut they'd made, one by one. I didn't hold anything back this time. He listened in silence, the scratch of his pen filling the pauses. When I was done, he exhaled slowly. "Tom, this is harassment. Stalking. And now, intimidation. I think it's time we make this official." "Official?" I asked, my voice a question mark. "I want to put together a binder," he said. "Photos, videos, statements, every piece of evidence you have. We'll make it so airtight no judge can ignore it. And I'll bring in Reuben Miles. He's the best private investigator I know. If Travis is behind this, and it sure as hell sounds like he is, he'll find the proof." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "You really think it'll work?" "I know it will," Elijah said. "These people, Travis, even your daughter, they're counting on you staying quiet, staying small. But you're not small, Tom. You're a man with a spine. Let's remind them of that." I hung up feeling steadier than I had in months. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Reuben came by the next day, middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many disappointments. He shook my hand firmly. "You've got a hell of a mess on your hands," he said, his voice rough but kind. "But don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of it." He asked questions about Travis, about Claire, about the past few months. I told him everything. He nodded, scribbling in his notepad, his eyes sharp. "I'll get copies of the security footage, too," he said. "We'll nail this guy." A week later, Reuben came back with a thin smile. "You were right," he said, holding up a photo. Travis, in his hoodie, caught by my own security camera, at 3 in the morning. His left knee bent slightly, the same way it had since his surgery. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 3:07 a.m. Reuben placed the photo in a plastic sleeve and tucked it into the thick binder Elijah had put together. The cover read, "Why They'll Never Touch My Legacy." It felt like a shield, when I hadn't even known I needed. But Reuben wasn't done. He flipped to the last page and showed me a bank statement. "You recognize this account?" he asked. I leaned forward, squinting. My name, my social security number, but not my signature. The charges, $7,800, lined up neatly. Hotel stays, spa packages, dinners at places I'd never heard of. Reuben tapped the line that said Myrtle Beach. "Your daughter and her husband took a vacation on your credit." The room spun. I gripped the arm of the recliner like it might anchor me to the earth. They stole from me?" Reuben nodded. "They opened a credit card in your name 6 months ago. Travis signed your name on the application." I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart stutter. All those times I'd wondered why my mail was missing, why Travis was so eager to check the mailbox. It all made sense now. Elijah's voice broke through the fog. "Tom, we have them," he said. "This is identity theft. Financial abuse. On top of everything else, harassment, intimidation, this is the nail in the coffin. I looked at the binder, thick with the weight of my own history. What happens now? I asked. Elijah's eyes were fierce. Now? Now we take this to court. We get an injunction, freeze their accounts, bring every ounce of pressure we can. They want to cage you, Tom? Let's show them the bars they built are for themselves. I felt something burn in my chest, a spark of the man I'd once been. The one who'd fought for every paycheck, who'd built a home for his family from sweat and weekends and quiet prayers. That man wasn't gone. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to stand up. I nodded slowly. Do it, I said. Let's finish this. Elijah slid the binder across the table. You're not a victim here, Tom. You're a survivor. And they're about to learn what that means. As I held the binder in my hands, I thought about the bird buried in my yard, the blood on my mat. I thought about the word burden, the one Travis and Claire had thrown at me like a curse. But I wasn't a burden. I was a man who'd built his life one brick at a time, and I'd be damned if I let them tear it down. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because for the first time since Margot died, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. The morning Elijah filed everything in court, the air felt different. Lighter somehow? Like the weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months had finally cracked and let in a breath of fresh air. I'd spent the night before pacing the living room, binder in hand, rereading every piece of evidence like it was a lifeline. Photos of Travis limping at 3 a.m., the bank statement showing his signature where mine should have been, the photo of that dead bird on my welcome mat. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Elijah had insisted we meet at his office downtown. A small place with a wooden sign that said Crane and Associates in faded gold lettering. The waiting room smelled of old coffee and lemon polish. He led me into his office, where the blinds were cracked just enough to let in the early sun. He looked tired but determined, his sleeves rolled to his elbows like he was ready to fight the world. Tom, he said, sliding the binder across the desk. It's all filed. Guardianship petition, harassment, financial abuse, fraud. We hit every angle. I nodded, my throat tight. And Claire? I asked, the words scraping like sandpaper. He sighed. Her lawyer called me last night. Once they saw the evidence, especially the financial records, they dropped the guardianship case. There's no judge in the state who'd grant her control of your life after seeing this. It was supposed to feel like a victory, but all I felt was grief. Grief for the daughter I'd lost somewhere along the way, for the man I used to be, for the family dinners that would never happen again. I took a deep breath, staring at the papers in front of me. What about Travis? Elijah's jaw tightened. Travis is in deeper than he realizes. I've already spoken to the bank, and they confirmed it was identity theft. He's facing charges for fraud, elder abuse, and harassment. His so-called consulting business is about to collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Good, I said quietly. He always thought he was too smart to get caught. Elijah leaned back, his eyes softening. Tom, you did the right thing. You stood up for yourself. Not everyone does that. I swallowed hard, thinking of Margot's voice in my head. Stand tall, even when it hurts. She'd always been my compass. I wish she could see me now, finally drawing a line where others had always blurred it. I left Elijah's office that day with the binder clutched under my arm like a shield. The walk to my car felt different, like every step was finally my own. No more Travis watching from the shadows, no more Claire's eyes cold with suspicion. I was my own man again. But that afternoon, as I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed with a call I wasn't ready for. Claire. Her name glowed on the screen like a wound that hadn't healed. I almost let it ring out, but something in me, maybe the father who'd always wanted to protect her, made me swipe to answer. Dad. Her voice was small, shaky. Not the woman who'd shoved guardianship papers into my hands, but the girl who'd once held my hand crossing the street. I didn't say anything, just waited. She sniffled. I heard about Travis. About the charges. I didn't know, Dad. I swear. He told me the credit card was his. He said it was a joint account. I didn't see the statements. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I felt the old ache in my chest. The part of me that wanted to forgive her, to hold her, and tell her everything would be okay. But the memory of her voice, cold and sharp, you're a burden clawed at my ribs. Claire, I said, my voice low. Why didn't you stop him when he locked the fridge? She didn't answer right away. Just a long silence, broken by the sound of her breathing. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought it was just, boundaries. Travis said we needed boundaries. Boundaries. That damn word again. I let out a long, slow breath. I needed my daughter, Claire. Not boundaries. Not locks. I needed you. A sob cracked through the line, but I didn't reach for her. I'd spent too long reaching for people who didn't reach back. I'm sorry, Dad, she said again, but it felt like a script now. Like she didn't know what else to say. I hung up. I didn't trust myself to listen to any more of her apologies. I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen gone dark. That evening, Elijah called to confirm that Travis had been reported for financial abuse and fraud. His business was already on the verge of collapse, clients pulling out, banks freezing accounts. The world was finally seeing him the way I had all along. I sat on my porch, the binder at my side, watching the sun set over the small yard. Janelle came over with a plate of cookies the boys had helped her bake, burned on the edges, but sweet enough to remind me that not all families break you. You okay? She asked, her voice warm. I nodded. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. She looked at the binder, at the small stack of paperwork that had cost me so much more than money. What are you going to do now? I took a deep breath. I'm going to deed this duplex over to you, I said. Free and clear. You and the boys deserve a fresh start. Her eyes went wide, tears welling up. Tom, you don't have to, I know, I said, smiling. But I want to. Because in the end, I learned that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the people who show up when the rest of the world locks the fridge. The ones who sit with you on the porch, who bring you cookies even when they burn them. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in Margot's favorite colors, gold and pink and that stubborn shade of lavender. Good night, Margot, I whispered. I finally found my way back. I didn't think I'd ever leave that duplex. Not really. It had become a fortress against the storm, somewhere safe where Janelle's boys laughed and the world felt a little less cruel. But after I deeded it to her, after Travis's business fell apart and Claire's apology dissolved into silence, I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot that had been there for too long. I'd fought my battle, won my war, but the victory was quieter than I'd imagined. There was no parade, no final handshake, just a sense that it was time to let go. I packed what little I had left, a worn duffel, Margot's picture, a pair of boots that still carried the scuffs of old construction sites. I drove west without a real plan, just the vague idea of finding a place where the air didn't carry the weight of all I'd lost. Missouri wasn't exactly a dream destination. It was a place where small towns still looked like they did 40 years ago, where the hardware stores doubled as social clubs and every diner had a waitress who called you Hon. I found the house by accident. A single-story place with peeling white paint and a porch swing that looked like it had known 1,000 stories. It was set back from the road, surrounded by scrubby grass and a handful of stubborn trees that had survived more winters than I could count. There was a for sale sign half buried in the yard. I pulled over on impulse. The real estate agent met me that afternoon. She was younger than Claire, with a tired smile that made me think she'd seen her share of heartbreak. It's not much, she said, jangling the keys in her hand. But it's quiet. Need some work, though? I nodded, walking up the creaking steps and testing the swing with a cautious hand. It held. I sat, listening to the cicadas buzz in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I'll take it, I said. The woman blinked. Don't you want to see the inside first? I shook my head. I've seen enough of the inside of houses. I gestured to the porch swing, the yard, the space between the trees. This is enough. She handed me the keys, her eyes soft with something like understanding. Welcome home, she said. I spent the next few weeks unpacking the past. Every time I opened a box, I found echoes of the life I'd left behind, Margot's perfume bottle, the birdhouse plans the boys and I had drawn on a napkin, a letter from Claire that started with Dad and ended with an apology that felt half-finished. I kept some things. I let go of others. The house was small but warm. The kitchen had a stove older than I was, and the linoleum curled at the edges like a smile that had seen too much. I bought a new coffee maker, a small TV, and a battered recliner from the thrift store. It wasn't much, but it felt like mine. I joined the local VFW after a neighbor saw me struggling with a lawnmower and invited me over. We meet every Thursday, he'd said, offering a hand that felt honest and calloused. I went that week and found men and women who knew what it meant to lose something, who understood that some wounds didn't show on the outside. We shared stories over cheap beer and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. It felt good to belong again, even in a place I'd never planned to land. Every morning, I'd sit on that porch swing with my coffee, watching the sun climb over the horizon. The birds, sparrows, mostly, hopped along the fence line, picking at the dry grass. I'd watch them and think of the one I'd buried back at the duplex, the one that had started all this. I'd think of Margot, her laugh in the kitchen, her perfume on the pillow, her slippers by the bed. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to her, my voice low and steady. "I miss you," I'd say, "but I'm learning to be okay." I'd smile at the breeze that rustled the leaves, imagining her smile coming back to me. The local animal shelter needed volunteers, so I signed up to walk dogs. The first time I took out a big, goofy mutt named Buster, he nearly dragged me down the street chasing a squirrel. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. The woman who ran the shelter, a silver-haired lady named Ruth, watched me with kind eyes. "You're good with him," she said. "Yeah," I said, wiping tears of laughter. "He's just real." She smiled. "They all are. Animals don't pretend." I nodded, thinking of Travis and Claire and all the pretending they'd done. "That's a good thing," I said. Nights were the hardest. The house creaked in the darkness, every sound magnified by the quiet. I'd sit in the recliner, Margot's picture in my hand, and remember the girl with asthma who'd asked if birds ever got tired of flying. I missed that version of Claire, the one who'd trusted me, who'd thought I was a hero. I missed my grandkids, too, their laughter in the yard, the way they'd clung to my legs like I was the most important person in the world. But I missed the person I'd been before Travis's sharp words and Claire's cold eyes more than I missed any of them. I missed the man who'd built birdhouses with small hands, who'd saved every penny for college, who'd fought for every scrap of dignity. One night, I sat on the porch swing, the wind stirring the branches, and I realized I'd found something I didn't know I'd been looking for. Peace. Not the kind that came from other people, but the kind that settled in your bones when you finally let go of what you couldn't fix. I didn't know if Claire would ever call again. I didn't know if my grandkids would remember the man who'd taught them to skip stones. But I knew one thing. I had a home. A porch swing that creaked like an old friend. A place where I could sip my coffee in the morning and say goodnight to Margot at night. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. I was home. The day I realized I'd finally won, the sky was the color of Margot's favorite sweater, a soft blue, the kind that made her eyes sparkle. I sat on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's yard, and let the weight of the pasture sink in. Travis and Claire had tried to shrink me. They tried to twist my love for them into something ugly, tried to make me believe I was less than the man I'd always been. For a while, they'd almost succeeded. I'd let their words echo in my chest like an apology I didn't know. I'd believed I was a burden, that my years of sacrifice and devotion somehow didn't count anymore. But now, sitting here with the quiet sun on my face and a cup of coffee in my hand, I knew better. I wasn't a burden. I never had been. I thought back to that cold basement in Claire's house, the thin rug on the concrete floor, the padlocked pantry. I could still feel the ache in my knees from standing too long, the sting of her voice telling me I wasn't a guest. I was a burden. That word had haunted me, had chased me into my sleep. But I carried something else now too, Elijah's binder, filled with proof that I'd never deserved the way they treated me. The court had agreed. The bank had agreed. Even the damn bird on my welcome mat had agreed in its own way. Now I carried that binder like a shield. A reminder that standing up for yourself sometimes means standing alone. But I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I remembered Janelle and the boys, Silas and Micah. How they taught me that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the people who sit with you when the world is loud and you're too tired to speak. Janelle's eyes had held no judgment when I told her the truth. Only gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing someone finally sees you. When I signed the deed to the duplex over to her, I'd felt like I was planting something, like Margot's garden all over again. Something that would grow long after I was gone. I'd left behind the courtroom battles, the small wars of whispered accusations, and come here. To this town where the neighbors waved from their porches, and the cashier at the market called me Mr. T, like I was someone worth knowing. I'd found a place where my name wasn't a burden to anyone. I remembered the first time I walked into the VFW hall here. The walls were lined with photos of men and women in uniform, some of them smiling, some of them not. I'd sat at a table with a group of veterans who'd seen their own share of battles, some on foreign soil, some in their own living rooms. They'd nodded when I told my story, their eyes sharp with understanding. Happens more than you think, one of them had said. Family can be the hardest enemy to fight. We'd laughed then, the kind of laughter that tastes like freedom. I'd gone home that night feeling lighter, like I'd left something behind on that table. A piece of the guilt, maybe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world turned the color of old photographs, I sat on my porch swing and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I thought about Margot, about the way she used to lean her head on my shoulder during Sunday morning coffee. I thought about the slippers by the bed, the small things that had made our life a home. I missed her every day, but I'd learned that missing someone didn't mean you had to stop living. A knock on the fence broke my thoughts. I looked up and saw Ruth from the animal shelter waving, Buster the mutt beside her. "Hey, Tom," she called. "Buster's been asking about you." I grinned. "Has he now?" She laughed. "You know dogs? They know who's got a kind heart." I stood and walked over, Buster's tail wagging like he hadn't seen me in years. He pressed his nose to my leg and gave me that look, the one that said I was someone worth trusting. "You want to take him for a walk?" Ruth asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." We walked down the road, the sun painting the pavement gold. Buster pulled at the leash, eager to chase every squirrel he saw. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts in your chest and feels like a gift. As we reached the end of the block, I saw a small girl with a pink backpack skipping rope in her driveway. She paused when she saw me and waved shyly. I waved back, and her smile lit up the evening like a porch light. I felt something settle in me then, a quiet joy, the kind Margot always talked about. I'd spent too many years thinking that joy was a gift other people gave you, that it came with an invitation, a seat at someone else's table. But now I knew. Joy was something you built for yourself, even if it started with nothing more than a dog on a leash and a neighbor's wave. I thought of Claire then, not with anger, but with a sad sort of acceptance. I hoped she'd find her way, that one day she'd remember the man who taught her to ride a bike and stayed up late fixing her science projects. I hoped she'd learn that love wasn't a ledger you balanced at the end of each month. But whether she did or didn't, it didn't define me anymore. I was more than the names they'd called me, more than the locks on the fridge, more than the burden they'd tried to make me carry. I was a husband, a father, a soldier, a man who'd fought his own war and won. Buster barked, pulling me out of my thoughts. I bent down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the roughness of his fur. "Come on, buddy," I said. "Let's go home." We walked back to the house, the porch swing waiting like an old friend. I knew I'd sit there tonight, sip my coffee, and talk to Margot under the stars. I'd tell her I was okay, that I'd found my own peace. And I'd tell her, softly but firmly, that I'd never be a burden again. Not to anyone, because I'd remembered who I was. And I wasn't about to forget it now.